series on DEI thought leaders. And today we are talking about DEI in technology and some of the things that really forward thinking, as Madeline would say, next practice organizations are doing to disrupt, to innovate, and to really create inclusive workplaces where everyone can thrive. I want to just set some context for this series. So it was this summer, and I was looking at, we were having a conversation with the Moxie team, looking at everything that has been happening over the past 18 months, and really feeling like we were in a moment in time that I feel like we haven't seen from a leadership standpoint and from just a way we do business standpoint since the Industrial Revolution. And that has created just an extraordinary opportunity to lean in and center DEI in a way that we haven't before, and to build back in a way that's really inclusive for all, right? To let go of some of those old ways of leading, of doing business, that when we're in a moment like this, you can move people through a change cycle faster, you can innovate faster, you are more able to say, let's try this and let's do something different than you can when you're trying to convince people to change the old way. And so we put together this panel series because that's what we do at Moxie. We take action. And we have already had, and on our website, there are the recordings of all of these sessions. So we kicked it off with healthcare, and then went to banking and finance. Today is on tech. In 2 weeks, we'll be talking about manufacturing, and 2 weeks after that will be retail. And really, we took a look, and we wanted to start with healthcare, banking and finance, and tech, because of the oversized impact that those three sectors have really on an inclusive world, right? When you are able to create equity and inclusion in healthcare, equity and inclusion in banking and finance, equity and inclusion in tech, that is that creates what our goal at Moxie is to create a ripple effect that has a positive tsunami. And really looking at these three sectors, we can do that. And I am incredibly thrilled to be joined by these amazing panelists today. I am big fans of all their work, and so and in our prep session, I could really feel the over 200 years of experience that are sitting on this panel. Before we went live, I said, yeah, just say what you just already said, and this is going to be amazing. We are partnering with I4CP on, and if you're not familiar with I4CP's work, check them out. Madeline Borkin is here. They are a human capital research, so really looking at next practices, and she's going to be sharing some of that data. I want to introduce, and I never ever want to mess up somebody's bio, so I always have my cheat sheets. And hopefully Modupe can join us. And if not, I'm just going to read out her bio. So Modupe Congleton should be joining us. She's the head of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity at Amazon Web Services. She's a highly recognized diversity leader known for cultivating inclusive workforces and utilizing a wide range of skills to build awareness and action in cultures. She's equipped with an impressive blend of knowledge and results and excels in niches of culture transformation, change management, operations, sales, and marketing. As head of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity for Amazon Web Services Sales and Marketing, Modupe plays a significant role in driving transformation initiatives that focus on building inclusive, diverse, and equitable organizations. She seizes opportunities to earn trust and educate on the importance of fairness and equality while drastically improving customer engagement and cultures of enablement within Amazon. And that was like a mic drop, enter Modupe, as I was finishing reading your bio. That was perfect. Michelle Witherspoon is Chief of Culture, People, and Operations for the Security and Trust Organization at Cisco Systems. She's responsible for strategically connecting dots across business planning process and organizational culture. Michelle has a passion for connecting the power of people, innovation, and technology to drive positive change. She's a catalyst for bold thinking and known as a transformational leader with the unique ability to ideate and build teams to innovate beyond traditional operations and DEI initiatives. Jane Elliott is Chief Communications and Human Resources Officer for Deluxe Corporation. Jane joined Deluxe in April of 2019. So you didn't know what was coming next, Jane, did you? Right? Got about 6-7 months under your belt before the world shifted. And in June of 2020, Jane added all investor, public relations, media, and international communications to her role, becoming Chief Communications and HR Officer. Prior to Deluxe, Jane was with Global Payments, where she most recently served as Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer. She worked closely with executive leadership, optimizing internal functions with corporate strategic objectives to drive significant cost savings. Jane brings over 20 years of experience in payment tech space, including 9 years at First Data. Cheryl Battles is Vice President, Global Diversity and Inclusion and Engagement at Pitney Bowes. She's a storyteller, a strategist, and a thought leader. She leads the company's strategies, operations, and storytelling at the intersection of diversity, inclusion, engagement to help fuel business results and individual growth. In this role, Cheryl combines extensive communications expertise, deep understanding of business strategy, strength in analytics, and a passion for creating inclusive experiences. She also co-leads a multifunctional team coordinating the company's return to office and related strategies for the exploration for the future of work. She's a popular speaker that has won numerous awards internally, including the Walter Wheeler Award, the company's highest employee honor, and externally, such as the Public Relations Society of America's D. Park Gibson Award, its highest individual award for contributions to diversity. Cheryl has a degree in human biology from Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. Ooh, y'all. If I didn't do some coaching around imposter syndrome, I might be feeling a little bit of that right now. You all are amazing. Marlon Borkin is the executive sponsor of the Chief Diversity Officer Board and Vice President of Membership Development at the Institute for Corporate Productivity, I4CP. She is a passionate advocate for disability rights, employment equity, and workforce equality. She has a broad background in human resources, including talent acquisition, learning and development, employee assessments and surveys, and diversity and inclusion. She dedicates much of her time as a community volunteer and speaker for I4CP membership companies and nonprofit organizations such as Plus Buddies International, Junior Achievement, Youth Frontiers, and Partners in Policymaking. And as I said, Madeline and I4CP are powering the data insights that we're going to be talking about today. So you five, are you ready to jump into this conversation? I am. Madeline, I would love for you to kick us off on some of the data insights you all have seen around return to work, future work, hybrid work, so many different things that we could call this, right?
Yes, so true. Thank you, Mo. What a great group of brilliant minds you have here today. You really do. And kudos to the entire panel. You all are amazing. I'm excited to share a few research insights with you all today. As some of you know, I4CP discovers the people practices of high performance organizations. And it's really important that I set the stage here because I will be sharing what are high performance organizations really doing differently than low performance organizations with their people practices. And 99% of the time, there's always a very big difference. We define high performance organizations as those orgs that consistently outperformed their competitors over a 5-year period of time in revenue, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction. We also call out next practices, and those are the approaches that strongly correlate to market performance, but very few companies are actively using. And so it's really important to set the stage here, as I4CP is consistently pulsing HR and business leaders across the globe on some of the most critical social, political, and business issues that are affecting our workforces. We continue to stay laser focused on that future of work. And so this study that I will share some of the data insights with you, we recently unveiled, and it's really focused on addressing the current issues with a future lens. And it was called From Cube to Cloud, the Next Era of Work. The study revealed best and next practices for developing and refining return to workplace and work models and policies. There were over 1,400 business professionals who responded. We looked at things like return to office policy recommendations, analysis of flexible work, innovation, collaboration, success. We also looked at how leadership behaviors and competencies really do need to change. And of course, the future of office space, which I think became, kind of boiled to the top in a lot of scenarios and so much more. Based on this particular study, there were 4 key findings and guidance that we really wanted to share. High performance organizations, they don't unilaterally force employees back on site. And so our guidance to organizations is don't do that. Don't force employees back. And we saw a lot of organizations that really pivoted. So one moment they made that announcement, the next they came back and said, oh, nope, we're not going to do that. Make clear in all your communications that policies may evolve and change. And so high performance organizations were extremely transparent and constantly communicating and letting people know that things will change. Listen to your workforce. And I can't drive that home more than now. It's absolutely important to listen to your workforce and let managers manage. Provide them with the tools that they need to manage as effectively as possible. As I reflect back on the last 6 months, I continue to hear the same concerns about hybrid, remote, flex models, whatever you want to call it, that it's going to cause less innovation, less collaboration, weaker relationships. So there were a lot of major concerns. And so this caused a conundrum. How do you strike that balance between employee sentiments and what I feel and what the research showed is leader mindsets? And so we were able to identify really 10 key practices, and I'll just quickly go through them. There were 5 next practices, and really looking at what are some of the things that you could be doing in a hybrid to reduce those concerns. Sponsor external and internal virtual innovation events, such as design thinking sessions and ideation contests. And this is something that clearly the high-tech industry does, and does it on a regular basis, and really try to crowdsource those suggestions. Another is emphasize the importance of creative time. I think for me, reflection and experimentation really was a difference maker for me, but really allowing my organizations to do it on company time, not on your weekends and in the evenings. So really take that time to reflect. Train employees to use collaboration tools. Another difference maker for me personally is, I'm not sure why I didn't do this pre-pandemic, but really leverage collaboration tools and software. Develop internal online communities focused on innovation. I think ERGs really played a key role here in really helping this to happen and focus on that innovation and collaboration. Offering rewards and recognition programs that kind of reinforce that innovation and that continued collaboration. So those are the 5 next practices that really organizations should be focusing on in terms of actions and practices. Some of the leader actions, though, I think this is where it makes a huge difference, is ensuring that people or roles, they don't become too overloaded to provide timely support to colleagues. And we know what collaborative overload is very real. It isn't just this topic that we read about. It's very real. And cultivate diversity in network interactions by teaching and applying strategies to build strong and varied internal and external networks. This is all about really understanding how work gets done in your organization. And if you can cultivate a diverse network, this is really the power play at any organization. If you want to take an organization to the next level, network interactions will be key. Encourage influential team members to promote alignment and team engagement. Proactively engage remote team members to ensure integration and inclusion. There are some very clear practices as a leader that you can do to proactively include and integrate. And then finally, rapidly integrate new team members to establish effective connections. It's going back to those connections and how important they are when you start within an organization, when you transition, and as you're trying to do work. I look forward to hearing how the panelist organizations have been able to kind of strike that balance between employee sentiment and leader mindsets, and addressing some of the concerns with these future work models.
Well, and I think some of the other, Madeline, just having done a deep dive into some of your research too, and you can just see it across as well, is we found that innovation didn't suffer. Collaboration didn't suffer, right? All of these things all of the reasons that we said we couldn't do flex, remote, hybrid work were actually kind of blown up, right? Because we were forced to, it's like,
exactly, we proved
actually performed really well, right? Those that were leaning into some of these next practices. So Michelle, I'm curious, what are some of the things, based on what some of the research insights from Madeline, what are some things that you've done as a leader that Cisco has really leaned into? Some of these next practices, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, there was so much you said there. I was like, yep, yes, I agree with that. Just do a check mark there. Here's the thing that we all realize. It's interesting. The future of work is hybrid. It is not going away. What's interesting about what you said is that what we know is 64% agree when you go out, 64% of people agree that working remote instead of coming to the office affects whether they're going to stay on the job or not. Here's the key thing. 47% of those think once we get through this pandemic, they're going to be made to come back into the office and there will be no hybrid. So I think what we want to think through, and I work for a tech company, so I do realize this is not, husband doesn't. And so they're thinking a little differently around this hybrid thing. But what we know for sure is that flexibility, choice, the things that you just talked about, Madeline. Here's the thing that we also have implemented here at Cisco around hybrid is that wellness, empathy, inclusion become key as we move forward. And I see your face. You're like, yes, 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 right? Because we have to think differently as leaders, right? So in the past, we would say to leaders, we need everybody to be inclusive. Make sure if someone's on a conference call or if they're in the office, you're thinking about an inclusion through a different lens. Now what we're saying, and by the way, I told Mo that I was going to have to say it this way. I know we're on Zoom, but the future of hybrid is WebEx because we're Cisco. So let me just put that plug out there. And we have so many things underneath it that really do make it way better than Zoom. No disrespect to Zoom, but WebEx is the way to go. Okay, so now that I've said that part, the other thing that we've seen around inclusion, and I would love for the panelists to kind of chime in on this, is something that we all know is covering. So one of the things that's been really apparent recently that I've just read many white papers about is that for those people of color, particularly African-American, Black, I'm going to speak to this experience, but it can be Hispanic, Latino, or Asian, that remote has been amazing. They've been able to breathe because they don't have to cover. They don't have to pretend to be something they're not. And so everybody is almost on an equal plane. For the equity has shifted, even unintentionally, it has shifted. And then when you lean into it, and here we do a lot around flexibility of wellness, flexibility of empathy. We say to our leaders, we don't want everybody to be exactly the same. Some teams are going to have to look at flexibility through a different lens and hybrid. For instance, in my organization, we still have people that have to come into the office a couple of times a week to go into the labs. They can't do lab work at home. right? So we didn't mandate this. What is, I know, Mo, can I just ask this question to the panelists? Like, what do everybody think about this covering piece? Because it really has changed the lens of inclusion through hybrid work.
I'm like double Dutch. I'm ready to jump in on that.
You go.
Yeah. That covering, and thank you, Madeline, for everything that you shared. And Michelle, it's like, I feel like we're having one of our conversations where we just start going. So you all have to forgive me in advance, because Michelle and I have these types of conversations all the time. But I love the way you talked about covering, because we really get a chance to see people in their rare essence, so to speak, right? So people, if you had concerns about how you wore your hair, maybe now you're just throwing it up in a bun. I know I'm good for a bun some days. I've changed the hair color 3 times since I've been at Amazon. And I know people are like, wait a minute, who is she today? But the covering really has, it's such a new light on being able to be free. We all know that the moment you turn on the video, you're on. And for many of us, we're on video for probably 14 hours a day. But whereas video became that great connector and that window into, everyone's home, we also then had to pivot and say video is optional because of how draining it is and how exhausting it is. And to me, to your point about this concept of covering and wellness, and as we shine the spotlight on mental health, it's so important that the company inserts enough agility into the culture and into our people strategies so that we can allow human beings to adjust and grow with what's happening in the world around us. So I loved what you said about covering, Michelle, because I personally have had my own experiences with covering, and I'm freer probably than I've ever been.
Well, and it's interesting.
Oh, sorry, Mo. I was just going to add, I think that I love the topics as well. And thank you for sharing all those great practices, Madeline. I think the other important thing that we've seen, the wellness thing obviously is critical because everybody's exhausted. And I know we're talking about, we call it ID&E because we lead with inclusion. At Deluxe, it's super important to us to make sure we point that out. And to your point, everybody's invited to the table. Doesn't matter, every difference is going to be celebrated, no matter what it is. But the other piece that has been critical to Deluxe is that whole purpose, and making sure that you're wrapping up your whole ID&E or D&I or whatever the companies call it with that purpose is incredibly important. Not only when you're marketing to attract new employees, but also for your current employees and reminding them what they're feeling. The great resignation, as we're all dealing with right now, is really a great reassessment. And that reassessment is super important for folks to feel engaged and like they understand the purpose of what the company is trying to do. And so that's tied in with wellness. It's tied in with our philanthropy efforts and volunteering efforts. We encourage taking some time off to go, volunteer within your communities. And it's been really helpful to us in pushing forward all of those best practices that Madeline touched on.
Well,
so many different threads.
I know you've got something good because we talked about it before we went live.
There's so many wonderful threads to pick up on. And so I'm also just going to say in advance, Modupe and Michelle, I want in on those offline conversations. So just putting it out there. But even where Madeline started, when we looked at our guiding principles for how is this going to work going forward, we said at the center of it was a human-centric approach guided by flexibility, adaptability, and empathy. Because we understand while we've all been in the same storm over the last 18 months or so, we're all in very different boats. And depending on how your boat is outfitted, it means that you are dealing with some different things. So that's why
for the people in the back. Say that one more time.
I know.
The boat analogy is so key here. No, seriously, like dig into that a little bit more, because we are not all in the same boats. Please say that.
And that's where equity comes in. Exactly, right? Because you have to meet people where they are. And so that's why all these threads we've been talking about in terms of mental wellness. Today, we're celebrating Mental Wellness Day. And so we've got live stream and on-demand events happening with panels and discussion groups because we know it's important. But what Michelle said earlier about the covering, it's a great example of being in very different boats, right? After last year, after the murder of George Floyd, when we were doing listening sessions on, how are you doing? What's going on? People said, I can handle this better because I'm at home. And because I am surrounded by a community, rather it's physically in the space where I am or my other ties to the community who understand how I feel and who can help support me through it. So this being able to meet people where they are and help them as you think about what do they need to be their best, because ultimately that's what we're trying to get at, right? What are the conditions for success, and how can I optimize that for you as I think about work, where you work, what you work on, and how you work going forward.
Can I just add one thing, Mo, before we move off of this, because I want to give a real life example of what the different boats look like, just at a really high level. So I have someone that's in my organization that has a walking disability. So he has it's like a, what is the thing called? Not crutchers, but you rolls.
A walker.
A walker. Yes, I'm having a brain fart. Okay. So he has a walker. And in the past, if he had to go between building 7 and 8 and 9, he would have to think through how many meetings could he actually go and do that. Now we have team meetings throughout all those buildings. We were just having a conversation maybe about a month ago, and he was like, my life has turned around so much better. I'm so much more efficient. I get more things done. Just the simplicity. Now think about when we go back into the office, how can we keep that hybrid inclusion working for the majority, right? So he doesn't feel like, oh, they're having to shift the meetings for me and making them remote. These are the nuances of people being in different boats. There's just one of them that really makes a difference as we think through how we can do this as a future state and the consistency.
And I think that's right. True. Like we focus on people of color, but if you think about people with disabilities, right? And to your point, like when there was the rise in AAPI hate, right? And being able to be with your community at home, not having to go to the office, right? There was just so much upside to this. And we often get asked at Moxie, because we work with a lot of organizations, like who's doing this well? What organization is doing this well? And I say, no organization is doing this well. There are leaders within every organization who are doing this brilliantly. And so I think, Madeline, that gets back to your idea of give managers the ability to what's going to work for their team. Because this stuff is like fingerprints almost, because what's happening in one part of the organization will be very different than another part of the organization. So when you're talking about hybrid and what does work look like and how do we innovate and when do and if do we have to come back, a corporate mandate across the board, just you're missing so much opportunity. So I know that we could stay on this one, and there have already been like 12 mic drops, but I want to keep us going because one of the things I think in particular is some of these external forces, right? And in particular, the external forces seeing like everything from NASDAQ, right? Saying, here are, you have to have a board makeup that doesn't look white and male and cis and able-bodied anymore. To things like the Great Resignation and the data around people not even willing to come and work for your organization if you're not showing a commitment for this. So Modupe, I'd love to hear from you. What are some of those, how are you seeing that impact, how you all are approaching DEI?
Yeah, I know, probably like most companies, the murder of George Floyd and just the severe trauma that happened in 2020 really started to accelerate and inform focus on inclusion, diversity, and equity. And in AWS, we also lead with inclusion, diversity, and equity. The rest of Amazon leads with DEI. And so when you think about those external forces, we saw what happened in the media. And whereas we were all normally moving so fast, if you're a member of the Black community, as Michelle said, I'm going to speak to that perspective because I am a proud Black woman. You were now paused to sit at home because of the pandemic and watch this repeated cycle of what was happening to, George Floyd. And that external force really influenced the internal disruption that needed to happen within corporate America. And so then what happened at that point was we started to now see that intersection of global corporate citizenship now intersect with social justice and our ability to impact communities around the world. Initially, I think that, a lot of people saw the race, disparities in America as just America. But when we saw the uprising of people around the world starting to share their stories of how they've been discriminated against, right? It created a real global citizenship. And so, for me, there are other external forces, to your point, what's happening in the stock market, what's happening every day. We're looking to see what's going to happen with the vaccines, right? Will this be that moment where the pandemic will officially be over and we go back to the world that we knew before? And to some degree, Michelle talked about this a bit, for people of color or, whether you're from underrepresented communities, that ability to be remote, for some meant that you didn't have to move to communities that were either on the West Coast or in other countries where your family was not there or there was no community around you. But that's another external force that allowed us to stay close to what was considered home or move back to these communities that we were very comfortable with, creating that sense of belonging in our communities, which then influenced our ability to show up and be a bit more authentic and whole as we, which of course increases our ability to be productive at work because we're now conscious. And, the environment of safety has been created for us to share our experience. How is what's happening in the media impacting us now? How am I talking to my children about, what's happening on the news, racism in America and what they can anticipate as they get older and parents are having to have the talk, so to speak, right? And so there's just so many forces, but I would say what the media did over this last year and a half really informed the accelerated disruption negatively, right? Because it keeps us in a cycle of PTSD. Every time it came on again and again, you had to relive that moment with George Floyd's family. And now I think we're getting to the point where we can even say that. We don't want to see it anymore. We're tired of it. It's time to move into action so that we can actually start to make a difference in the world. So I'd love to hear about, the other teams, the external forces as well.
I think there's something that we had to redefine. And for many of you, I would love to hear how you're doing that. We, for the first time, had to go, what is our social justice plan of action? We've always had Jane, we don't start with diversity, we start with inclusion. So we're like the inclusion and collaboration and diversity, we add the C in there. But it was the first time we were like, actually, we need to take a thoughtful approach around social justice. And so we said, we want to make sure there's an inclusive future for all. And we really doubled down on those that are just, we call it the insecurity of being, just by how they show up as a human, either by race, by gender, particularly if this past year has been really hard for African-American, Black, and the AAPI community. We said, how are we going to be specific in addressing those? Never before have we done that. We've always, all of us have looked at inclusion and diversity through a different lens. But this year we had to say, wait a minute, what actual approach are we taking to social justice? And what does that look like for our company? Did anyone else have to thread through it differently? Because it wasn't just about looking at it from this level. We had to go deep.
Yeah, I will add, and I think Modupe, the commentary you said is spot on, and you too, Michelle. We so shortly after I joined Deluxe in 2019, the company's gone through this massive transformation, right? Because technically we're a 106-year-old company that started out as a check printer. So, I like to tell people we're the original payments company because that was the original non-cash form of payment, right? And so now today we've transformed into this payments and business technology viewpoint. And but the company, because of its rich history, had this wonderful foundation that when I joined, I had the opportunity to have that added to my responsibilities. And it was the pillars of giving, if you will, didn't match what the company was trying to do, including the whole ID&E, DE&I, whatever aspect. And so we ended up wrapping that whole ID&E thread throughout the main 3 pillars of giving that we have, like financial literacy, disasters, like what we call like human dignity, which is kind of a big bucket. But then when, we're based in Minneapolis. So when George Floyd was killed, I mean, I can't even begin to even describe the range of emotions that our employees felt. And fortunately, we had like the summer of 19, we had introduced ERGs, which didn't exist then at Deluxe. And one of them was African American because, we looked at our demographics and we started out with 4 groups. Today we have 8 because we set up a framework so it makes it easy for employee to raise their hand and said, hey, I wish we had this group. Well, that ERG was instrumental in helping our workforce actually cycle through the grief and the feelings of loss and the anger and all the horrible things that Black and white and brown and, purple, everybody felt, right? And based on that, we ended up contributing out of our operating budget into the foundation $1.2 million, which we hadn't been done in years and years and years from an operating budget, specifically tagged to social justice. So to your point, Michelle, we had that thread there prior to those events happening, but we really actually doubled down. And now it's kind of like an overall, like an underlying foundation under those pillars. And then we believe that, we're more than just a checkbook. We want to actively participate in our communities. And so we picked 3 organizations that represent what we're trying to do specifically on social justice. We have executive commitment that are serving on those boards. And we do lots of volunteer activities to engage our employees in the communities that each of these organizations reside. So it's been hugely helpful, I think, in pushing forward the whole agenda on, to your point, Modupe, what do you tell your kids? And we're trying, our whole goal in life at Deluxe is trying to make sure we're around for another generation. Because, we don't want to end up like a company that's just, BlackBerry or somebody like that missed the boat. And that includes making sure we can prepare our generation for all things social and understanding all ramifications. And so it's a big deal in our company, and we really try to push that as part of our overall purpose and mission.
And I love that reassessment. Cheryl, you want to jump in with some things that Pitney Bowes has done?
Sure. I'm going to start by being a bit contrarian here. We lead with diversity and inclusion. We want to keep it upfront about intentional diversity, intentionally going out and making sure we have access to that full, rich spectrum of diversity. It's very easy to be inclusive in a heterogeneous environment, in a homogeneous environment. So the real power of inclusion is when you apply it to a diverse environment. So we keep diversity out front. on everyone's mind. So we say it's an and conversation as opposed to an or. Sorry about that. So when we think about it, then one of the things that happened, and you're right, we're all pointing to kind of George Floyd as that touchstone. As I was looking at the news coverage of it, I was sitting, literally, I just felt compelled to write. So I was sitting at my, came into my office and started typing on a blog. I got an email from our CEO, and he said he was working on a blog too. And I thought, since it was probably a good career move for me to let his blog go out first. So his blog went out first, and then mine followed. And then we had totally unexpected and unscripted live stream one-on-one conversation about race. Because if there's one thing that we are seeing in terms of external forces, is that people want us to talk about it, and people want to see how we're walking that talk. So we had to start by talking internally. And the CEO and I had this conversation. He has a show we call Mondays with Mark. And so on Mondays with Mark globally, we're talking about race. And I'm explaining to him about, I want you to see me. No, see me. Right. And what does that mean? And it was people even today talk about how compelling it was. And what that did, though, is it helped role model for the entire organization how to have these conversations of understanding. And so we've had them, large and small, in different settings, but it really kind of kicked off, if you will, where Mo and I were talking earlier, this series of very intentionally creating space and opportunity to have the kinds of conversations where we see each other more fully and with more understanding. That is coupled with this external expectation that that's great that you're talking, and that's great that you're putting out statements, but what are you doing about it? So there's this tremendous pressure for to really make sure that our performance aligns with our promises. And so when you're talking about reporting, there's a transparency demanded like never before, more information beyond just the numbers of who's there, but where are they going in the organization? How are they advancing? Are you retaining that talent? Who's in the pipeline to be disclosed more broadly in more places and more consistently? So the external pressures are there to both talk and walk.
Yeah, that's what I say. The for all of the pain, right, and for everything that's happened over this past 18 months, the fact that it's certainly led to more action, right? More reflection, more real action is really hopeful to me. So I want to do a speed round of 2 questions. And that is, how has the role of the CDO, the CHRO, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, whatever order, and right, Cheryl, to your point, we say you have to do both, right? You can't just have diversity, you can't just have inclusion, you got to be working on both. How has that shifted? Think about 10 years ago, 20 years ago in tech, it wasn't even part of the conversation in most organizations. And what has happened over the past 18 months? How has that role shifted in tech? And Jane, why don't you kick us off with that one?
Yeah, thanks, Mo. I mean, I think it has shifted for the better. Like I said in my comments before, there's much more intentional focus. In the past, it was like, oh, that's for big companies. So from a tech point of view, well, that's for a big company. We're a little company. As you all know, there's lots and lots of small to medium-sized technology-related type of companies, that don't have the giant budgets for dealing with maybe every little last nook and cranny of ID&E, D&I, and whatever. So I think today that's completely changed. This is on every CEO, every president's radar as he or her run that business, no matter the size. And in order to get the talent required to move technology mission along within whatever the company is, it's critical to have that has a stated part and a stated thread that goes through all of the organization, and it just lives within your culture, has an everyday occurrence. It's not something special. And I think that is, from my point of view, having many years in payments land, that is way different today, because now it's everywhere. Everybody's doing it, no matter the size. Now you might not have a chief diversity officer, depending on your sized company, but you will have somebody dedicated to the function, and it is a topic that every executive management team will discuss. So I think that is, for me, that's what I see as the difference. And I do agree with you, Cheryl. I think it is an conversation about diversity and inclusion, and equity. Because, Michelle and you both said about the boat being a different type of boat or different place that it is in the journey. And that wasn't even on anybody's radar 10 years ago, unless you were a giant company.
Yeah,
So I think all of that has changed.
Yeah, I think so too. Just some quick, go Modupe.
Yeah, I love that question, because it made me think of it in 3 words: activation, investment, and accountability. And so, when we think about what has happened over this past 18 months, it has truly activated this work, right? So DEI practitioners, CDOs, et cetera, became almost like the superheroes of the company, the unsung heroes of the companies. Now, what's interesting with that, right, to whom much is given, much is required, there's also that pull on the mental health of the DEI professionals, the burdens that they carry. For many people, they became that vessel of, please let me share with you my story. And, there's an article from the Center for Emotional Intelligence that said that people who are in high empathy type of roles or are empathetic leaders, they either suffer from high anxiety or low forms of depression. And that, to me, is where, this is a special virtual hug to go to all of the DEI practitioners and DEI leaders around the world, because this work is not easy work, and we carry the burdens of that every day. The other thing I want to say is that whether it's DEI, ID&E, DEIB, whatever, to your point, 10 years ago, no one was having these types of conversations. Now, whether it's whatever form or order you put that acronym as, and the important thing is that you're having a conversation and doing the work in the company. The second thing is the investment, right? It's no longer a nice thing to do, but CEOs are listing this as one of their top 5 business priorities. We've seen this in studies, right, from Deloitte and other companies. And so that investment is also being made in the accountability. We're not just tasked with building out broad stroke inclusion strategies, but now we're being tasked with looking at strategies end to end of the talent cycle, looking also into the inequities that exist into the HR processes and tools, et cetera. And then last but not least, how do we hold the leaders accountable, but more importantly, individuals accountable for really taking action and, contributing to the change that's needed in the business. So that's what I wanted to just share: activation, investment, and accountability.
Absolutely love that. Michelle, real quick, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so +1 for everything Jane and Maduve said. I will not repeat what they said 100%. Here's the thing that I think has shifted much more recently. It's not that we haven't done these things in the past, but we have to stop believing that the business case for diversity and inclusion is going to change behaviors. It's not going to happen. It's right, because we are human beings. And so, like, I believe in a good look. I believe in a good value proposition, a good, OKR, KPI, B2 mom, whatever you measure in your organizations. The reality is just telling people inclusion and diversity is important. Here's a business case does not change mindsets and behaviors. What does? Human interaction. You have many companies, like I'm sure many of us on this call today, I know we've done this. I know Bank of America is big at it, PNC, Freddie Mac, a variety of others. You got to go in and have a courageous conversation. You have to go in so people actually can listen with the ear that they may have never experienced before. We have something here. We have something called Next Generation Leadership. And it's called NGL for short. And it's where we bring people of color together. So whether Hispanic, Latino, African American, Black, or Asian, with their leader, majority white, and they have to attend a 6-month disruptive training program together. And we talk about things that will change actually the behaviors of inclusion and diversity within the company. Things like, Modupe mentioned this earlier, when my children started to drive, we had to have the talk. If you don't know what the talk is, Google it. There's a lot of great videos out there on it. We had to have conversations around why is it taking women, right? And have the intersectionality of women of color 6 to 8 times longer to have promotion velocity than other, right? So these are conversations we have now. That's what's starting to change the behavior, where you're starting to see less attrition, promotion velocity, more diversity coming in, because now you have the manager in the room and you're having a conversation. And that's much different than when I started in the space, which was like counting the numbers, looking at it a bit differently. Oh, let's do unconscious bias training, right? There's a variety of things underneath that. To me, that's something that we've had to really shift in our mindsets. And then I think everybody said it on this call: empathy, inclusion, fairness, all has to be seen through a different lens. And if you don't shift as a chief diversity officer, or like Jane said, maybe you're just the HR leader, or shoot, maybe you're the leader that they tapped on the shoulder that said, now you own DEI for your organization. These are things you just have to consider.
I'm loving this, and everything that we've talked about. Actually, again, it makes me hopeful. I want to have us thinking about forward facing. And Cheryl, I'd love for you. What do you hope for DEI 5 years from now in the tech sector?
My hope is pretty fundamental, and in many ways, it's based on the conversation we've just had. What I've seen is this shift in terms of the maturity in thinking about DE&I as a strategic function. So moving it from compliance to innovation. So the expectation is that I'm going to innovate as they've seen me do, as opposed to I'm just going to count the heads that are here and maybe suggest some ways that you can get some more, right? And so fundamentally, what I hope for in the future is that we indeed extend beyond the moment to a real movement. And it's ultimately a human rights movement, right? So a movement that's not hung up on where the talent started and instead is looking at how far it can go. A movement that takes a broader lens on what employees can do throughout their life cycle with the organization, and a movement that provides equitable employee experience no matter where the employee works. Taking up on that kind of where you started us from, Madeline. We don't want to, I love this quote that the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. So this concept of we need an equity of experience not tied to a place, a broader lens on value throughout the life cycle, and really looking at talent in terms of where it can take you as opposed to where it is now. Those things are starting to happen. But they should be the norm. That's the hope for the future. So when you think about equitable employee experience, no matter where I am, we don't inadvertently want to create a new class of employee. Michelle gave the beautiful example of the person who can overcome mobility challenge by being able to connect virtually instead of having to do the physical movement. We don't want that advantage advantage to go away when, as people start to shift to wherever they want to go. I heard it said in the beginning, also, it's about intentionality. So we want to intentionally co-create with our employees what's going to be, why do we intentionally gather and to do what? And how does this become, whether it's a virtual space or a physical space, the best place for that to happen? In terms of the taking looking at where the talent can go, we actually we're a little bit unusual in that we do have a very long history of kind of looking at where the talent can take us, because looking at underutilized talent pools. So we created our first fair employment program in 1945 and advocated for the integration of the US workforce throughout the 50s, testified for the historic Civil Rights Acts in 1964, which got the Equal Employment Act, as we know it, Title VII passed. So we have this, we have someone who role modeled that if you would actively go out and look at underutilized talent pools, that talent could take you places you never thought about before. So beyond, and we want to keep focused, obviously, on women, on people of color, but what about the disabled? Where we have only about 18% employed in 2020. What about the neurodiverse? What about those without a 4-year degree? What about the formerly incarcerated? What about those returning to work after a gap? There's talent out there, but we've got to make sure it is the norm that we look in those places, not at where they're sitting, but where they can take us. And then finally, that broader lens. People can contribute throughout their life cycle. Whether you've been in the company 1 year or you've been in the company 30 years, you have a voice that we want to hear. So we have an early in career program, for example, where we take those very early in career and we give them, they work over several months on a team with others where they are working on the business problems of today. And they are innovating and doing that. We also take people who've been in with the company 10, 20, 30 years, and they're getting new assignments. They're getting new opportunities. So this all generation approach to that talent is important and it can be used in multiple ways.
So I feel like we're going to have a part 2 to this conversation. I knew that was going to be the case. I would, y'all know how I always wrap up these conversations, and that is that I need to hear a truth bomb from each one of you. And I'm going to go across my Brady Bunch. So Madeline, based on what you heard this panel say, and she's participated in the last 2, what truth bomb do you want to leave us with?
Well, I love the quote from Sonia Sotomayor, United States Supreme Court Justice. Experience has taught me that you cannot value dreams according to the odds of their coming true. Their real value is in stirring within us the will to aspire. And I would love that we can stir within all people the will to aspire.
Love that.
And
Jane.
Create spaces for them.
Jane, you're up. Give me a
Yeah,
truth
sorry.
bomb.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything has been said has been spot on. Madeline, you did it eloquently. I think we all should take away from this that each and every one of us can do something and make a difference in every single day of our life. And so be thoughtful and be open to ideas and backgrounds and perspectives, because to Cheryl's point, it will take you places that you didn't know you could go.
Excellent. Modupe?
Yeah, I was thinking through because I don't know what I want to reside on, but let me think, because I'm still hype off of everything that Cheryl was saying, like virtual high five, sister. um, because she just raised so many things. And just if I had to summarize what you made me think of is that everyone's journey has value. And our ability to believe in the value of our own journey is the true essence of diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity, and equity. So whether it is someone that's been incarcerated or someone that struggles with a hidden diversity, etc., share your story, be proud of your story because it's yours. No one can take it from you.
Excellent. Michelle?
I love that. So really quickly for me is going over the theme as a data scientist in this field of D&I would say stop using diversity data that doesn't have impact. Get underneath it, ask the why question, ask the what question, match qualitative or quantitative, and start to come out with a different story. It's just so key to me. As Modupe knows, is foundational in everything I do.
Awesome. All right, Cheryl?
I just, I love quotes and I love this group. Part two is definitely a necessity here. But, as that great philosopher said, why fit in when you were born to stand out? We want everybody, to feel very comfortable standing out. It's your superpower.
Oh, this exceeded the very high bar that I had set, y'all. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Again, it gives me hope. It's all of us doing this work together and doing it every day. And as somebody that I often call myself an accidental tech CEO, right? Tech has become a way to, right, create inclusive workplaces. I think it is thinking about 5 years from now, hearing about the work that you all are doing. We talked about Modupe, you talked about how this work is hard, right? And it can be, this is one of those days that I feel super hopeful. So thank you. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the manufacturing panel. Y'all are amazing. Keep doing the next right thing and creating a more inclusive world for all. And together we can do it. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank